Hello everyone, this is LATHA AKULA. In this video, we will study about the long distance transport of water. Long distance transport of water. Already in the introduction part, we have completed about what are the different strategies of water movement. In that, we have studied that short distance and long distance are the two methods present for the plants. If we see in the short distance transport, what are the different methods available? Diffusion, facilitated diffusion, active transport, cytoplasmic streaming. If you see in case of diffusion, this diffusion is a slow process, and this diffusion alone will not sufficient to transport the water and mineral salts in the tall plants. That's why long distance transport system in plants. For example, if you see in diffusion, in the case of diffusion, the plant cell have a diameter of 50 micrometers. A diffusion process, if the molecule has to move across the typical plant cell, it will take nearly 2.5 seconds. Water has to be moved by means of the diffusion to the taller plants. It will take nearly years, right? So that is why the diffusion is not sufficient for the transport in the taller plants. For that the long distance transport system is present. This long distance transport is also called as mass or bulk flow system. What is its name? The long distance transport is called as mass or bulk flow system. So in this mass flow, the movement of the substances occurs in the bulk, that is a large amount of the molecules will move, and that movement is also called as, that bulk movement of the substance is also called as en masse. Here in the mass flow, the substances move from one point to another point because of the differences in the pressure from the source to sink in the two regions. The pressure because of the differences in the pressure, the movement of the substances will occur. What is meant by source and what is meant by sink? Here, source means wherever the substance is available, that region is called as source. And what is meant by sink? Wherever there is a need for the substances, that is called as sink. If you see in the case of water and mineral salts, where they were available, so from the soil, the plants are getting the water and mineral salts, right? That is the source. And sink means what? Wherever the water and mineral salts are needed, that regions are called as sink. Leaves need water, stems need water, right? They are all the sinks. Like that, the plants prepare food, leaves prepare food material by the photosynthesis. That means for the food, the source is leaf, and from that the food has to be translocated to the different parts of the plant from the leaves, right? So wherever the food is needed, that particular region is called as a sink. Like that, a source and a sink, because of the differences in the pressure of these source and sink, the movement of the substances will occur. Here in the bulk flow, this bulk flow is accomplished either through positive hydrostatic pressure or through negative hydrostatic pressure gradient. So what is meant by positive hydrostatic pressure gradient? Here, if we take the examples for this, is the example for the positive hydrostatic pressure gradient is the garden hose, and examples for the negative hydrostatic pressure gradient is the suction through the straw. In the garden hose, what will happen in the positive hydrostatic pressure gradient? If you see in the garden, we'll pour the water to the plants by means of any pipe or anything, right? So here the water is coming out, that is the positive hydrostatic pressure. Whereas in the negative hydrostatic pressure, if you take in the case of straw, if we are sucking the juice or water, we are applying some force, we are pulling the water, right? That is, that suction pressure is called as a negative hydrostatic pressure gradient. So by means of these two forces, the bulk flow will occur. In the bulk movement of substances through vascular tissue, it occurs by xylem and phloem. So the movement of the substances by xylem and phloem, that is called as translocation. And in the plants, the plants absorb water through the roots from the soil, right? So what the roots consist of? They consist of the root hair. The root hair, they absorb the water and mineral salts. In the roots, the water absorbed in two ways. In the roots, the water absorption occurs in two ways. One is the Epiplast pathway and another one is the Simplistic pathway. How many ways? Epiplast pathway and the Simplistic pathway. By any way, the water will enter into the roots. In the Apoplastic pathway, here in this pathway, from the root hair, the water will enter into the xylem through the intercellular spaces. Here how it moves? From the root hair, water is absorbed, and how it enters into the xylem? By means of the intercellular spaces. So what are intercellular spaces? Intercellular spaces are nothing but the spaces present between the cells is called as intercellular spaces. By means of those intercellular spaces, the water is moving, that is called as apoplastic pathway. Here in this apoplastic movement, there is no barrier for the movement of the water. They need not to cross any membranes, cytoplasm, right? So that means they have the least resistance for the movement of the water, hence they move very fast when compared to the symplastic pathway. That means symplastic pathway is slower than the apoplastic pathway, because this apoplastic pathway there is no resistance for the movement of the water within the intercellular spaces. But in the apoplastic pathway also there is one barrier is present, that is in the endodermis region there is a region called Casparian strip is present. In the endodermis region, there is a barrier called Casparian strip is present. So this Casparian strip, it is made up of a wax-like substance called as suberin. So it is made up of suberin, which is a wax-like substance. So this Casparian strip, it is made up of waxy like substance, suberin, right? This suberin will not allow the movement of the water into it. Hence, the water movement will not occur. Then it has to enter into the symplastic pathway. From apoplast pathway to it has to enter into the symplastic pathway. So here in the endodermis region also, the suberin coating is not continuous. There are some gaps are present, right? Through the gaps, the water will enters inside the cell and it enters into the symplastic pathway and finally it reaches to the xylem. And in the Epiplast pathway, there are two factors are present. One is the transpiration pull and second one is the cohesion adhesion forces. So the next one is symplastic pathway. Here, the water movement occurs in symplastic pathway, right? Here, how it occurs? By means of interconnected protoplasts. It enters by means of the interconnected protoplasts of different neighboring cells. The water will enter. That means through the cytoplasm. Here, see here, from the roots the water enters, right? It may follow either a symplastic pathway or a apoplastic pathway. In the apoplastic pathway, by means of the intercellular spaces, the water will move. See here, this is the apoplastic pathway, arrows. So here in the spaces the water is moving, and here there is in the endodermis region there is a barrier, right, called a Casparian strip, right? So that is why it is entering inside the cell. But whereas in symplastic pathway, how it occurs? The water enters into the cell, right? So it enters into the cytoplasm. It has to move to the neighboring cell. Here between the cells there is connections are present. Cell to cell connections, they are called as plasmodesmata. So one cell is connected to the another cell by means of the regions called plasmodesmata. These gaps are called as plasmodesmata. Here by means of these plasmodesmata, the cytoplasmic movement occurs. So within the plasmodesmata, the cytoplasmic substances will be entered into the different neighboring cells. From this some cytoplasmic strands will arise. Through these cytoplasmic strands, the fluids will be moved inside the between the neighboring cells. So through those cytoplasmic strands only this symplastic pathway water will enters. Here the symplastic pathway, the water has to cross the barriers like cytoplasm, membranes, right? So here the water movement in the symplastic pathway is a bit slow when compared to the apoplastic pathway. And finally it will enters into the epidermis, and next to it will enters into the cortex, endodermis, pericycle, and it has to enter into the xylem. And here in the apoplastic pathway, the water was moving freely within the intercellular spaces, but here in the endodermis region there is a Casparian strip is present. Then it has to enter into the cytoplasm, and then like the symplastic pathway, the apoplastic pathway also enters into the cells only and enters into the xylem. So in the symplastic pathway, the movement of the water is slower. And what is the governing factor for the symplastic pathway is cytoplasmic streaming. Cytoplasmic streaming means what? Movement of the cytoplasm. By means of cytoplasmic streaming, the movement of the water occurs. Examples for the observing the cytoplasmic streaming is hydrilla leaf. If we observe the hydrilla leaf under the microscope, we can observe this is cytoplasmic streaming easily. And most of the water flow in the root system, it is followed in the roots. The most of the water is uh, transported by the apoplastic pathway, because in the roots, so most of the water flow in the roots that occurs by the apoplastic pathway, because they have a loosely arranged cortical cells, hence they have less resistance. There is no resistance for the movement of the water. After reaching the endodermis, they will enter into the cytoplasmic plasm. That means they follow the cytoplasmic system only. Epiplast also the cytoplasmic system after reaching to the endodermis. So by means of cytoplasmic system, it will enter finally into the xylem. So after reaching the xylem, there is no barrier for the movement of the water. The water will happily moves upwards towards the stems. And some plants, they have additional structures are present. Instead of a root hair, they have some additional structures are present. Those structures are called as mycorrhizae. So these mycorrhizae are nothing but the symbiotic association of the roots with the fungi. That is called as mycorrhizal association. So in the mycorrhizal roots, there is no root hair, but they have a great absorbing capacity when compared to the normal roots. And these mycorrhizal association is obligatory in some plants like pinus. In pinus plants, without mycorrhizal association, the seeds of the pinus plants will not get germinated. So that much important in the mycorrhizal association in the pinus plants. So this is all about the movement within the roots. Next concept is the water movement upwards up a plant. How the water will enter, up to now how the water will enter into the roots and how it reaches to the xylem we have studied. And now, and the next one we'll study about how the water will move upward direction. That is water movement up a plant.